We're going to be coming from Numbers 13 and 14. Numbers 13 and 14. Now, I'm not going to read those chapters. That's just too much, okay? Too many words I can't pronounce. But no, it's something that I would encourage you, please, when you get time, maybe later today or sometime you get some quiet time with a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you want to drink, just kind of get by yourself. Read over these because, the historical backdrop of Numbers is the wilderness. We've all experienced some form of wilderness, and that's the historical backdrop of the book of Numbers here. And it's the wandering of Israel's departure from Mount Sinai all the way into the plain of Moab, right opposite of the promised land there. It's about their walk. It's about their progress. I should probably say lack thereof, because we can walk around and get nowhere real fast. And that's kind of what they were doing. So that's kind of what the theme of Numbers is, the walk and the progress of the Israelites in their wilderness journey. Primarily, they had issues with periods of unbelief. And that's what caused their wandering. But, there are so many applications in the book of Numbers that apply to us as Christians today. Lots and lots of applications from this story. I mean, it'd be pleasant to think that all Christians, or at least most Christians, would swiftly advance from salvation to entering into God's promises of victory. That would be wonderful. It's pleasant to think about it like that. But, experience and observation, what it's shown us? It's shown us that we resemble the Israelites a lot, these ancient Israelites. You think about it, complaining, backsliding, having those periods of unbelief. We resemble that a lot. And so there's a lot that we can pull from this. And the good news is that we don't have to repeat the wanderings of the Israelites in the wilderness. We don't have to repeat that. You don't have to repeat that. And that's a good thing. So Numbers 13 and 14, just quickly, just to sort of summarize it, we see these 12 spies that are sent to go into the promised land, to spy it out, find out, is it prosperous? Are the people there weak? Are they strong? Is this a place that we want to go? And of course, the majority report after these spies came back. They brought big, huge clusters of grapes and ripe pomegranates and big, juicy figs. Obviously, the major report from these spies is that this is a really beautiful land. This is a land of milk and honey is what it was called, which is just a term that means it's very prosperous, it's very productive. But, there's that but. But, there's some dangerous inhabitants in there. There's some obstacles in there. Oh, it's a beautiful place, a land of milk and honey, but there's these obstacles. And so the spies doubted their adequacy to overcome these obstacles. Even though the Lord had said, hey, I'm going to drive those inhabitants out for you. I'm going to help you overcome those obstacles. They still doubted their adequacy to do it. Now there were a couple of those spies. Remember who they were? Caleb, Joshua, remember that? These two dudes, these were different. They saw things from God's point of view. They saw things a little differently from God's point of view. These are what we would call visionaries. Caleb and Joshua. Let me explain to you a little bit about what a visionary is. It's just really basically someone who can envision the exciting future that lies ahead and help you enter into it. Encourage you to enter into it. Help you to see the future through God's eyes, not through man's eyes. And so Caleb and Joshua were visionaries. And we're designed to be visionaries as Christians. Philippians 4:8, it says, whatever is true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Think on these things, because whatever you think about, you move toward. It's just a natural biblical principle that we move toward what we think about. So when the Lord says in Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, honest, just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, any praise, think about these things, because that's where he wants us to move. And that's what a visionary is. A visionary is someone who can help you think about the exciting future that God has for you. But the majority of these spies didn't think that way at all. They were caught up in a fear of inadequacy. And so we're going to talk about three little things real quickly this morning. The first thing is that why do we need visionaries in our lives? We need visionaries in our lives to see from God's perspective. Okay? I need visionaries in my life. And you know, ultimately our goal is to become a visionary for someone else. That's our goal as Christians. I want to be that visionary for somebody. You know, that's the way we should feel. That's the way we should think. That's the way we should believe. But these visionaries who look at life through God's perspective, they do not live in the fear of inadequacy. Inadequacy is a major obstacle when it comes to moving forward. The fear of inadequacy. I remember when I was in the third grade. I was in a classroom up in Texarkana, third grade, elementary school, about 8 or 9 years old. I was sitting in the classroom, all my classmates, we were sitting at our little desks. Miss Williams, I'll never forget Miss Williams. Miss Williams was the third grade teacher. And Miss Williams one day decided, we're just going to go around one by one, and I want you to tell me, Mike, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, that's what she did. Started with the first student. The first student said, I want to grow up and be a nurse. And all the other kids in the classroom clapped. You know, just loud applause. I guess that was something to be applauded. And then the next person says, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. A lot of applause, applause, applause. I want to be a policeman. Applause. I want to be a lawyer. Applause. I want to be a farmer. Applause. Got around to little John Brown. Well, I want to be a movie star when I grow up. Man, everybody, there was no applause, by the way. Everybody, the whole class erupted in laughter. Even Miss Williams was laughing. That's why I remember her. She was laughing. I wanted to be a movie star. That's what I said. Nobody clapped. Everybody laughed. Now, do you know what that does to an 8-year-old's confidence? I mean, 8 or 9 years old, my confidence level, poof, you know? And all of a sudden I had this fear of inadequacy begin, like a big old cloud of black smoke coming down on top of me. This fear of inadequacy, you know? Now my parents, they were my Caleb and Joshua, by the way. My parents believed, hey, John, you can do this. You want to be an entertainer? You can be an entertainer. They encouraged me. Even some of my other family, my little sister, she was so glad I was wanting to be an entertainer. So, you know, my parents helped me out with that. You know, they pushed me. They helped me get that vision, that exciting future. You know, they helped me see that. To overcome the inadequacy. You know, they helped me learn how to get into some little acting classes, some theater classes. I could sing a little bit. They got me into some singing. You know, I really felt like they were helping me see the exciting future. They were visionaries for me. We all need visionaries in our lives. And my parents were those visionaries. You know, the thing is, the fear of inadequacy, from time to time, it's going to come. And so in order to avoid allowing that to damage your self-confidence, you need to unwrap the shoulds in your life. Unwrap the shoulds. And the shoulds in your life can be those giants. They can be those obstacles in your promised land. Those shoulds can be the things that keep you from going there. Like, as an example, I should be the smartest in the room. Or as an example, I should I should know every single thing about this goal before I pursue it. Or another example would, I should never make a mistake because it's going to be interpreted as failure. Those are shoulds. I should this, I should that before I can make any action, take any action. Those shoulds have to be dismantled. That's exactly what the Israelites were basing their internal logic on, the shoulds. That's what was feeding their sense of inadequacy. We should be stronger. We should be bigger. We should be more equipped. All those shoulds. I should this, I should that. It gets in our way. It feeds that whole fear of inadequacy. A visionary who lives their lives seeing from God's perspective sees beyond that fear of inadequacy. And that's what we need in our lives. We need people like that help us to see beyond that fear of inadequacy. And ultimately, we want to become those kind of people. Visionaries. A second thing I want to point out about a visionary is that we need visionaries in our lives who envision the possible in spite of the impossible. Yeah, there's a lot of seemingly impossible things we face. We need visionaries in our lives who see the possible in spite of the seemingly impossible. Because people like that don't operate in the fear of uncertainty. We've talked a little bit about the fear of inadequacy. The fear of uncertainty is another thing that becomes an obstacle that keeps us from moving forward. And so we need visionaries who are able to look at the situation, the seemingly impossible situation, and help us see the possible in it. I need those people in my life. And we need to be those kind of people. You know, when I was 13 years old, my parents and I and my little sister, I was 13 years old, we went to Texarkana Community College Auditorium, and they had this big musical group that was coming through. They were touring the country. They were called the Young Americans. You can look them up on YouTube and still find history on them. The Young Americans. It was, 60 to 100 kids, 15 to 21-year-olds. 60 to 100 of them. They would perform on stage various scenes from famous musicals. And, they were a choral group. Very beautiful music. And so when we walked into the lobby of the auditorium, they were handing out these little programs so you could kind of follow along. And so the performance began. It was amazing. They had the sets and everything that matched that particular musical they were performing. And then there was an intermission. And during the intermission, my mom turned to the back of the program and said, "John, look." So I read it. It said, "Auditioning for the Young Americans following this performance tonight in the lobby. 15 to 21-year-olds. I said, "Well, it says 15 to 21-year-olds. I'm 13. My mom was like, "Well, you should try anyway. Try it." "I don't know. 13. I'm not ready." "Try it anyway." My mom was being a visionary again in my life, helping me get a little bit beyond the whole fear of uncertainty, because I knew I knew certainly that I was not 15. And so she's wanting me to audition. So you know what? There were two of us after the show. Only two of us. Some other girl who was 15. I'm 13. I told them I'm 13. They said, "Well, you can go ahead and audition, but we really don't accept people under 15. Fear of uncertainty began to creep back in. But I remember my mom saying, "You can do this, just do it." So I gave it all I can. Now, I didn't have this big repertoire of songs to sing, but I knew Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. Do you guys remember that song? They had a movie, right? Yeah. Wasn't it James Cagney? Yeah. A Yankee Doodle do or die. And I'm smiling, got all this red hair back then. Little bitty kid. I didn't have my tap shoes with me, but I was doing my tap routine, because I'd learned how to tap dance too. I was tap dancing. I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy. Played the piano a little bit. Only knew one song, but they didn't know that, but I played a Ronnie Millsap song on the piano. They thanked me. They took all my information, and we left. There was this absolute uncertainty. I was uncertain at all. There's no way that I can do this, that I'm going to get selected. A month later, I got something in the mail that said, "You have been chosen." I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? They had to have made a mistake. I'm 13. I didn't get to tour with the Young Americans, but I did get to spend 2 summers. There I was, 13 years old, flying off, headed to Petoskey, Michigan, to the North Central Michigan College campus, staying in a dormitory and studying a summer stock with the American Musical Theater for 2 summers. I did it for 2 summers and got to perform in some of the musicals. Didn't have any major roles, obviously. I was 13, but I got to explore that. I got to experience that. I got to interact with that. I got to learn from that. But the uncertainty was there from the get-go. Fear of uncertainty. My mom saw the possible in the impossible. She was my visionary. We've got to have those visionaries in our lives. Uncertainty's all around us. Uncertainty's everywhere, whether it's your career, whether it's your finances, the economy, relationships. There's uncertainty. Whatever remains ahead in your life is uncertain. There's lots of uncertainty. We crave security. That's what we crave. That's what I want. I want to feel safe. I want to feel in control of my life, my well-being. I want that security. And so the fear of uncertainty leads to feelings of anxiousness. It leads to feelings of being stressed out. It leads to feelings of powerlessness. It affects you emotionally to the point that it'll send you into this downward spiral of what ifs or worst case scenarios. And you can get stuck in that. That's why we need visionaries. There's that uncertainty, that fear of uncertainty that's going to arise from time to time. And so you want to make sure that you can avoid damaging your sense of direction, because that's what the fear of uncertainty does. We talked about the fear of inadequacy. We talked about how that in and of itself can damage us. Well, this damages us too. It damages our sense of direction, the fear of uncertainty. And so the way that you overcome that is you have to view uncertainty as an opportunity. You got to change your whole perspective about it. It's an opportunity. You have to choose to focus on the potential of growth and opportunities that lay ahead in that frontier. How many of you remember this? Space. Who said it? Yeah, it just triggered that, didn't it? Space, the final frontier. You remember that? These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. You remember that, Mike? Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life, new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has ever gone before. I loved that. Back in the 70s, I'd come home from school, right? And I'd find myself glued to the television watching Star Trek, all the adventures of the Starship Enterprise. I would vicariously join Captain James T. Kirk and all the crew. And I would go on those journeys with them, boldly, where no man had gone before. You know, if you think about the mission of the Starship Enterprise, I feel like I'm talking like Captain Kirk now. Well, their mission wasn't to tame the frontier. That wasn't their mission. Their mission was to explore it. Their mission was to experience it. Their mission was to interact with it. Their mission was to learn from it, right? Well, when you think about our spiritual frontier, the spiritual frontier of being a Christian, of moving forward, I mean, it's kind of wild sometimes. It's kind of mysterious sometimes. It's definitely uncertain, isn't it? A lot of times. We face uncertainty. And so it requires an adventurous spirit to be willing to see the possible and the impossibilities of what we face a lot of times. Just because it's wild, just because it's mysterious, just because it's untamed, just because it's uncertain, doesn't mean that it should be feared, and certainly not avoided. Because a lot of times that's what happens. And I mean, if you look at the Israelites in this passage, in these chapters, the Israelites were so caught up in the fear of uncertainty that they actually got to a place where they said, let's just go back to Egypt. We should have stayed in Egypt. Egypt was a place of slavery and bondage, but they were certain what they would have to deal with. The fear of uncertainty. Being able to see the possible and the impossible. That's why we need visionaries who can help us see that so that we don't get stuck in the fear of uncertainty. How many of us have, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of us have looked forward into what we want to face, into what we know God's leading us into, and there's that fear of inadequacy, and there's that fear of uncertainty, and it's an obstacle. That's why we need visionaries. Finally, third, we need visionaries in our lives who will stand when the majority is dissenting. We need visionaries who will take a stand when the majority of people are dissenting, because those type of people do not operate in the fear of failure, the fear of inadequacy, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of failure. That's a huge obstacle. When I was 17 in high school, 11th grade, there was this guy in the mornings who used to park across the street from the high school at this little convenience store that had a game room in it and all that stuff. And he drove a yellow Camaro, and he was a real good guy. At least everybody said. I never got to meet the guy because there were so many people around him, and he was dating one of my classmates. And his name was Keith Griffin. And when I asked one day, who's that guy? It's always over there. That's Keith Griffin from the radio station. Keith Griffin. I listen to Keith Griffin every night, 6 to midnight, on Y102 FM. He was that was the number one station in town back then. Keith Griffin. I was really impressed. I loved listening to Keith Griffin. And I had another guy who was in my school. He was a year older than me, and his name was Jimmy. And on the weekends, he worked at another station in town. He was part-time, right? Did a little stuff on the weekends. And one day I had the nerve to just ask him, hey, Jimmy, I love listening to you. On the weekends, how much money do you make doing that? He said $17 an hour. $17? And this was back in 1982, by the way. High school kid making $17 an hour doing part-time work on a radio station. Well, I thought, man, I kind of like the sound of that. So I said, well, what do you have to do to get into that, to get a job like that? You just go and tell them you want to do it and apply, fill out an application. Okay. Well, I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. Because, man, you think about it. Who's going to hire some kid that's never done radio, that's never done anything like that? I don't have any experience. I don't know how to work all them knobs and buttons, and I don't know how to do all that. But one day I decided, you know what? I'm gonna go not to where Jimmy works. I'm going to Y102. I'm going to go to the number one station. I skipped school, by the way. I'm not saying that was a good thing, but I skipped school in the middle of the day, went over to Y102 studio in downtown Texarkana, walked in the door, and said, "My name is John Brown. I'd like to apply for a job." And so the receptionist gave me an application. Here you go, just sit down here with a clipboard, fill it out. I filled it out. Then two program directors walk out and say, "Well, here you're applying for a job. You know, part-time job." They had something available. They said, "Come on into the studio. Come on into the news studio." And they had, back then, it was, reel-to-reel machines and a microphone. And they pulled something off of the AP press, and said, "Here you go. Read that." They pushed record and walked out. I read it. They came back in. They listened to it. Yeah, it's pretty good. "Hey, listen, we'll give you a call if we want to use you." 1 week went by. 2 weeks went by. 3 weeks went by. And I'm convinced I failed. I mean, I couldn't sleep thinking about the possibility of doing a job like that. One day I walked in from school. Just as I was walking in, the phone was ringing, and I ran over to the phone and answered it. And it was Bob Stroud. He was a real cool, mellow dude. I think he smoked a lot of weed. He was an afternoon guy. He was one of the program directors. And he said, "You ready to come to work?" "Yes, sir. When would you like me to be there?" "Hey, can you come after school tomorrow?" "Yes, sir. I'll be there." I tried to stay as calm and professional as possible. As soon as I hung the phone up, I yelled I can't believe it. I was so happy. Well, I went in, and all they had me doing, can you believe this, is working at a little AM station, pushing buttons on the Houston Astros baseball games. Just playing commercials, But in the evenings, there was a guy across the newsroom in another studio who was Keith Griffin. And so I started to get to know Keith. And I started hanging out with Keith in the studio, in the Y102 studio in the evenings, 6 to midnight, getting to know this guy, watching him do his magic. This guy was good. He was teaching me all kind of stuff. And we would laugh and just have a good time. And we started hanging out together a little bit outside of the studio. And after about a month or so, I'm sitting in there one evening like I normally do, just hanging out with Keith. And he gets a phone call right in the middle of the shift. And he says, "Man, I got to go. I got an emergency." He had a family emergency. He says, "Come on over here, man. You got to finish my show." I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, you got to finish my show." "What about the programmers, man? They don't want me doing this yet." "Don't worry about that. I'll speak up for you. Just finish my show." He walked out the door. He left his headphones. I put them on. As soon as the next break came up, I turned the mic on. Scared as could be. Y102 FM. Keith Griffin is out of here. John Brown's on the air. That was my first break ever, talking on the radio. Keith stood up for me, though, with the programmers, because they were wondering, why is he on the air? And that opened a door for me to be able to start doing some part-time stuff on the FM station. But I feared failing at even trying to go to that radio station. I had people who told me you should do it. Keith Griffin was one of my Caleb's or Joshua's, who encouraged me, saying, you can do this. We need those visionaries. In Numbers 13:30 it says, but Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once to take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. He was a visionary. There's no reason to have fear of inadequacy. There's no reason to have fear of uncertainty. There's no reason to have fear of failure. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They're stronger. Caleb and Joshua didn't operate in that fear of failure. They took a stand against everybody else who was saying we can't do it. That's why we need visionaries. When we start to feel like we're going to fail at something and we're too scared to move forward, we need those people in our lives who will stand up and say, yes, we can do this. Fear of failure is going to arise from time to time, but you can avoid that damaging your sense of courage by remembering the cost of not trying. The cost of not trying. What's it going to cost you not to try? It may cost you more not to have the courage to try. I'm going to close with this, and I want you to just think about this. If you're faced with the fear of failure, remember the cost of not trying. Here's 4 questions you can ask yourself to deal with the fear of failure. Number 1, what am I really afraid of? Now, make your little T-chart, What am I really afraid of? Write down your fears on this side of the T-chart. So sometimes that makes them a lot less overwhelming when you write those fears down on a piece of paper. What am I really afraid of? And then the second question goes on the other side of the T-chart. Who am I fighting for? Who am I fighting for? Because sometimes fear of failure stops you from helping the people you care about. Because if you think about it, remind yourself of how this is going to affect other people in your lives if you continue to fear failure enough that you're not willing to move forward. Who are you fighting for? Who is this going to affect if you choose not to move forward? Third question, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? In most cases, failure doesn't change anything about our current situation. What's the worst thing that could happen? If God is for you, who can be against you? What's the worst thing that could happen in trying? And then the fourth thing you ask yourself in order to deal with the fear of failure is, what if I succeed? What if I succeed? Ask yourself that question. Think about how that'll improve your life by following through. I'm going to leave you with a little challenge, and then we're going to get on out of here. Fear of inadequacy, we talked about that. That affects your confidence. We talked about fear of uncertainty. That affects your sense of direction. We talked about fear of failure. That affects your sense of courage. We don't want to operate in any of those. That's why we need visionaries. Relational intelligence. Relational intelligence involves surrounding yourself with visionaries who help cheer you on to move forward into victory. Relational intelligence. Choose those people. Have those people in your life. And ultimately, strive to become one of those type of people for somebody else. That's what we need to do. Don't, by the way, this is kind of your challenge. Don't get stuck in Egypt. Don't get stuck in Egypt. Your promised land's waiting for you.